So I recently saw this clip about the University of Florida banning diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives from its campus, and they lay off the entire 30-person DEI department at the university. So I'm going to play the clip and then give my thoughts on this topic.
The University of Florida slashing all diversity, equity, and inclusion roles across campus.
Quite disappointed by it. I think that the university administration has let us down in this regard.
The school announcing it will reallocate the $5 million initially used for DEI expenses, adding it will also eliminate roughly 30 jobs.
I've seen people saying, thank God we can save $5 million a year. And then I've seen other people saying, this is like horrible.
The school's director of African American Studies says this decision goes much further than the university.
So there might be a long-term impact in terms of recruiting high-end talent based on the fear that, this state isn't welcoming to diversity and inclusion.
So DEI obviously is a very controversial topic in the United States and I think other Western countries at the moment. And so I thought I would make a video explaining why I think people resist or oppose the ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because at first you might think, well, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, it sounds pretty good. I mean, why would anybody be against it or opposed to something like diversity, equity, and inclusion? Those sound like pretty positive things. But I think there's a few reasons why people don't like this set of policies and sort of this appearance of these departments in colleges and businesses. So they interview this person who works at the University of Florida. I think he's a professor at the University of Florida, and they get his thoughts about the University of Florida removing the department from the university.
Governor DeSantis sees DEI as toxic. People love to think that DEI is only for African Americans, which is not true. It also applies to white women, Asian Americans, LGBTQ, disability students.
And he makes the point that he thinks that people find DEI as being toxic and that it only helps out a certain group of people. And he's trying to imply that people who oppose DEI are opposing it for bigoted reasons, let's put it that way. And I'm sure that there are people like that who exist. There's people who see DEI initiatives as helping certain groups of people, and they have a bigoted view of those groups, and so they don't like DEI for that reason. I think that's a valid criticism to criticize people who oppose DEI for that reason. But I don't think that's why I would say even most people are opposed to DEI. I think a lot of people don't like DEI because it goes against the idea of meritocracy. And it's kind of questionable to what degree meritocracy actually exists in the United States, but I think that for college admissions, in large part, it is meritocratic, right? So there's different criteria that colleges use to admit their candidates. It's a meritocracy to some degree. And so when you're selecting people based on some other criteria other than their academic qualifications, whatever those criteria are, then it sort of raises the idea that you're not choosing the best people who will go on and become various occupations out in society, right? So the people who go to college are going to eventually become workers in different service industries, right? They're going to be doctors, lawyers, politicians, et cetera, et cetera. And as soon as you raise the idea that people are being selected by criteria other than their own merit or their own skills, then it puts this idea into people's minds that, well, I'm not going to be served by the best person for that job, right? It's like in the future, if I need brain surgery, I want my brain surgeon to have been the best person for that job. I want him to have been selected for that job based on his competence and his abilities, and not based on some other criteria, right? There are these stories right now about how Boeing airplanes are failing, the parts are not adequate, they're not being assembled correctly, and people are blaming it on DEI, right? And, it's kind of questionable whether that's true or not. I don't know if anyone can actually prove that, but just the fact that people attribute failures in quality to DEI kind of shows you how people view DEI. They associate it with being opposed to meritocracy, being opposed to competence, whether it actually is or not, right? That's just how people seem to view it. The other problem with DEI is that it advocates for equity. And equity, again, like I mentioned, seems like a good thing when you first hear that word. It's like, oh, you want people to have an equal outcome. It's like, that sounds pretty good. What's wrong with that? Well, the problem with equity is I don't think ultimately you can actually achieve that, right? You can't actually, in an ultimate sense, give everybody the same outcome. And the reason is because people vary in their talents and their abilities, right? So if you look at sports players, someone like LeBron James, he's one of the greatest basketball players in all of history, right? So his scoring ability and the numbers that he's put up on the scoreboard is an outcome. And so his outcome is much, much better than, many of the other players who he plays with. And so if we're trying to say that equity is what we want, then you'd have to find some way to make every NBA player have the same number of points on the board at the end of their career, right? You can start to see how this is sort of an unrealistic idea, right? It's like, how do you take multiple people who differ in their abilities and their talents, and then somehow make it so that they end up with the same amount of money at the end of their career, right? It's like, if everybody's making the same amount of money, well, why would anybody do the harder jobs, or why would anyone do the more stressful jobs? I remember reading this science fiction short story when I was a kid. It's called Harrison Bergeron, and the story takes place in a dystopian future. I think it's like the year 2080 or something like that. And the story is about a society where everybody has been made equal. So all of their life outcomes have been made equal, right? So nobody is more athletic or more intelligent or more beautiful than anyone else, right? So this is, in the story, this society has achieved equity. But the interesting thing about the story is that what they realize in this society where everything is perfectly equal and equity has been achieved is that the only way to achieve that is to actually cut down people who are talented, right? So in the story, one of the characters is a ballerina, and she's beautiful, but you have to cut down her beauty in order to make her equal to someone else, right? Because if someone is ugly, then there's only so much you can do to make them beautiful, right? It's a lot easier to just take the beautiful person and then cover up their looks, and that's exactly what they do in the story. Same thing with intelligence, right? So like IQ, for example, we don't know how to increase someone's IQ to any significant degree. And so the only way to make people have the same outcome, right, to achieve equity with IQ is to prevent the people with high IQ from expressing their high IQ, right? So for example, Stephen Hawking or Einstein, somebody who's extremely intelligent, you can't make someone or train someone to be Einstein, right? It's like, if you can, then, show me how you can do that, because I'd really like to know. But as far as I know, you can't, right? It's like Einstein's intelligence is a talent. It's a gift. And he didn't do anything to get it. It's not like he just studied really hard in school and he became this genius, right? And created the theory of relativity. That was just his talent that he was gifted with just from when he was born, right? And so if you want to achieve equity, you can't raise people up, because you just can't do that, right? You can't give people Einstein's genius through some sort of social intervention or some sort of education, right? You can't make people as skilled at basketball as LeBron by just training them really hard. You just can't do it. Like I said, if you can show me a way that you can, then let me see it, because I'd really like to know. But it doesn't seem like that's the case. And so the only way to achieve equity ultimately is you have to take the high performing people and bring them down. And that's exactly what they do in Harrison Bergeron. And that doesn't seem like the type of society that anyone would want to live in, because now you live in a society where you don't have the best people serving you, right? Again, going back to the neurosurgeon example, if somebody's operating on your brain, you want the most skilled, competent, intelligent person to do it, right? It's in your interest to allow that person with their natural talents and gifts, to allow them to flourish and develop their gifts, right? So it only seems like it's even in your own best interest to allow that to happen. And I don't really see how that's possible if equity is the ideal. So I think that people who are advocates of DEI don't consider that, right? They sort of take a short-term view and say that, well, it's like they're only looking in the immediate short term. They're looking at things like college admissions. They're looking at job placements, right? But they're not taking that idea all the way to the end. And if they did, then, you would see, just kind of based on what I've talked about, that it's ultimately not possible. The other thing is that people don't like DEI because it's viewed as unfair, right? Because in order to preferentially give someone an admission or a job based on the principles of DEI, you simultaneously have to not give that same position to someone else, right? And so it's a form of discrimination. And people who are advocates of DEI, if you point that out to them, they'll probably say it's not discrimination, right? It's actually justified. It's almost like the discrimination justifies itself. And the reason they'll give is because the reason we have to do this is because of oppression. And so we're just fighting the oppression. We're fighting the oppressors, right? And they'll use this example in the present and historically. They'll say, well, this particular group of people has been marginalized, and so to rectify that, we have to employ these tactics in the present. And even though the tactics are discriminatory, which I don't think they would actually admit, the means justifies the ends, which I think is horrible, right? I don't think the means justify the ends. I think discrimination is discrimination. And even if you feel like you have a claim based on historical precedent, it's not enough, right? It doesn't justify that type of behavior in the present. I don't think so. So that's why I think people are opposed to DEI, and I think that they'll continue to oppose it going into the future.